We're in Nahum chapter 1, and we got down to verse 5 last time. We're looking at a section that is talking about how great and how powerful, how majestic God is. And it's talking particularly about the power that God has. He says in verse 5, "The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence, yea, the world and all that dwell therein." I thought this particular verse is kind of interesting from something that we're going to look at in just a moment. But let's just start with the idea that the mountains quake at him. The word quake comes from the word rahash, and this word means to undulate. And so when you think about undulating, what do we think about? We think about what? I drew a blank. We think about an earthquake, don't we? When an earthquake comes along, it undulates. And so the King James uses the word quake, but the word is undulate. Baker and Carpenter made this observation. They said the word occurs 30 times in the Old Testament, and most often occurs to the physical, forceful, often violent, quick back and forth movement of a physical body by an outside force. And so when you think about an earthquake, that really is what happens. The plates of the earth move for whatever reason, and it causes the ground to undulate around. So, this is far or similar to an earthquake, but then it's more powerful. God is more powerful than anything that might come from nature. Even though He's the one who created nature, if He decides to destroy the entire earth, He could do it in 1 second, less than a second, whatever measurement you could make. It would be completely destroyed. And while earthquakes themselves don't always destroy a lot, sometimes they do, but they're not, as we normally think of them, as being all-inclusive of destruction. I've been in earthquakes. I remember one in Ohio, and it just kind of shook the bed a little bit, and we didn't know what was happening. We thought somebody had hit the house with a car, but be that as it may. Mountains are considered to be symbols. They're symbols of strength. They're symbols of endurance. And even today, you'll notice certain companies will use a mountain on their logo in order to signify strength, that they've been around a long time and their financial status is very strong. You might think in particular of a company called Prudential Insurance. They've used this symbol for a long time to signify strength and solidness in their finances. A nation like Assyria, this nation had survived for hundreds upon hundreds of years. They've been around a long time. And their power and their ability didn't come close, though, to what God's did. And that's the point that's trying to be made here. Assyria's been strong. They've been powerful. They've been a mighty nation for a long time. But they don't compare to the strength that God has. And God's presence is something that should cause awe and inspire people to be frightened when He exhibits that power. In Exodus 19, in verse 18, you'll recall that Moses was going to receive the law from God on Mount Sinai. And that text tells us that Sinai was all together on a smoke. Sounds kind of like a volcano to me, doesn't it, you? A little bit? because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked, undulated greatly. And notice the terminology. It quaked, it undulated greatly. The whole thing was like a furnace, a fire burning. And there was the presence of God. He was showing himself in essence. Even though you could not see the actuality of God, you saw his presence through these actions. The next phrase that we notice in this text is the hills melt. Again, the imagery here is like the hills melting like wax, where heat has been applied and the wax starts melting. It used to be more common than it is now for people to have candles in their homes, and you know, we had a little more problem with electricity going out than we do nowadays. In Indonesia, they still have a lot of problems in those areas. And so candles and flashlights are something that's very prominent in that country. And when you lit the candle slowly but surely started melting, and you know, you could pour wax, and for a long time people would show the authenticity of a document by having a candle, melting the wax and letting it drip down or where it would seal, and then stamping it with something that sealed it and showed this is authentic, an authentic document. Today they use a little stamp, you know, and the person stamps it and it says it's authentic. In Psalm 97 and verse 5, we have another image of the same thing. He says, the hills melted like wax at the presence of the Jehovah, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. So this is a common figure that's used in the scriptures, again, to show the power, the majesty of God. Now consider the message that we find in the New Testament that's similar. In 2 Peter, and think about this passage again. Look at verse 5. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence. Yea, the world and all that dwelleth therein. I believe that this is an imagery of what we find in 2 Peter 3, 10 through 12. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The day is coming when God is going to say, that's it. I've had enough. You remember when we looked at, or when we think about the destruction of the world by the flood, what brought about that? It was the fact that all were evil. All mankind. Only one was found, Noah. Only one was found as being just and righteous. All the others, in essence, God was saying, that's it, I've had it. I'm going to destroy, I'm going to wipe out the world. But then he found one righteous man, so he spared the world, spared all the animals, kept humanity alive. He could have started all over if he so chose, but he didn't. He started over, in essence, with one man who had been alive during that time. But when we look at the final judgment, which is what Peter was talking about, and which I believe is implied in verse 5 of our text, it's going to be different. Everything is going to be melted Everything is going to be dissolved as if by a fire that is so powerful that nothing is left. Have you ever observed someone using a laser on metal? When that's done, what does the laser do? It cuts the metal, but more than that, it doesn't leave anything behind. Oh, there'll be just a few teeny little tiny flakes of the burnt metal that's there, but not much. And most of what's been done has been dissolved, melted away. The power of God. The whole section here is emphasizing the control that God has. If He desires to do this or that or whatever it is, it's done. Not only of nature itself, but also of nations. When God commands a mountain to disappear or to fall or to be crushed or whatever it is, it's going to happen. But the same thing is true of nations. Notice the phrase, the earth is burned at His presence. The word burn comes from nasa, and nasa means to bear up, to carry, to take. It's a little different than what we normally think of the idea of something being burned up. It's tottering. The word Baker Carpenter says it means to totter. It's again more this idea of shaking and quaking and undulating. The American Standard here, I believe, is the better translation. It says the earth is upheaved at His presence. Well, what causes an upheaval such as, say, a lava explosion? It's heat, isn't it? It's fire that is being shoved up through the earth and explodes out into the open and eventually hardens and solidifies. But it's a fire. The picture of Nineveh's destruction here is pictured as something that is going to cause a great upheaval in society, in commerce, in the daily affairs of the earth's population of that time. Imagine, if you would, the state of, say, New York suddenly being swallowed into the earth. Can you imagine the effect it's going to have on all of society in America, the commerce of America, and the world, and the earth's population? I don't know how many people live in the state of New York, but I would assume that it's got to be somewhere around 15, 20 million, maybe more. I don't know. But imagine if that many people all of a sudden are gone. The effect that it would have on society and commerce, population as a whole. Look at verse 6. Who can stand before His indignation? And who can abide in the fierceness of His anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by Him. Remember, all of this is being aimed toward Nineveh, toward Assyria. Who can stand before God's indignation? The word indignation comes from za'am. And this is an interesting word because it means to froth at the mouth. It's the idea of showing a fury that is very strong. Baker and Carpenter said that this is an intense anger, it's an indignation, it's a denunciation, it is a curse. This is the anger that can be exhibited by God. This is the anger that is going to be exhibited toward Nineveh and the Assyrian nation. This word indignation is only used in the Scriptures to describe God's overpowering anger. It's never used in any other way, but only in passages to describe God's overpowering anger as it's being exhibited. There are 3 words in this verse to describe God's anger. There's the word indignation, the word fierceness, and the word fury. And when we think about those words, we see a judicial anger that is going to be exhibited by God because, and it's going to be so strong and so powerful because of how terrible the crime is that has been committed against him. Like fiery lava, God is going to be able to destroy everything in his path, and he's going to destroy Nineveh so completely that when Alexander the Great marched across Nineveh, he didn't even know he'd walked across it. So complete. It was so destroyed and covered up by the sands and earth of blowing in and all of these things. God so destroyed it that when Alexander the Great marched across this area to conquer Persia, he didn't even know it was there. Look at verse 7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. The picture now turns from God's power to destroy, and the implication of he was going to use that power against Nineveh, to now to talk about hope and security. In the midst of all of this strong condemnation that God is issuing, here's a message of hope and security. In Romans 11, in verse 22, behold, therefore, the goodness and the severity of God. 2 opposites. God's severity, God's goodness. Well, who does this severity and who does this goodness fall upon? On them which fell, those who were evil, those who disobeyed God, who fought God, fought his ways, etc. Severity. But toward thee, goodness. Well, who's the thee? Oh, he says, if thou continue in his goodness. In other words, goodness will be shown toward us if we follow the goodness that God has directed us to be involved in. But then notice what he says then. Otherwise, if you don't follow, or if you don't continue in God's goodness, thou shalt be cut off. This is always part of what we have to understand about God. People, they like to think about God as a grandfather type, you know, someone who he's always so kind and he's always willing to give and always willing to overlook the faults of his grandchildren and on and on. That's not God. It's part of God. But the other side of God is severity toward those who refuse to obey him. What have these Ninevites done? In Jonah's time, God was ready to destroy them. But he didn't when they truly repented, when they then started to do those things that God says were good, when they started to be benevolent toward people, when they started to exercise kindness and mercy. He spared them. But now they've gone too far. God, the Lord, Jehovah, is good, the text says. What does Jehovah's goodness do and for whom? It's a stronghold, the text says, in the day of trouble. How many of us have turned to God's Word in times when we're struggling through terrible disappointments, heartache, troubles, maybe brought upon us by someone who's disobedient to God, maybe troubles because of our own disobedience to God. How many of us have turned to God's Word for comfort, to help us to remember that God is willing to forgive us, to take care of us, to protect us from eternal damnation? The word stronghold here is it's a really crazy word in the Greek. It's 4 words, but they're a repetitious 4 words. Ma'az, ma'uz, ma'az, ma'uz. And what it refers to is a fortified place. Figuratively, then, it would cause us to think of defense. God is like a fortification, like Nineveh, that was so strong that in that world, in that time, with the weapons they had, it couldn't be destroyed. Babylon didn't destroy Nineveh. No. God is the one who destroyed them. He used the armies of Babylon, but they couldn't break through the walls. For 3 years, they had surrounded Nineveh. For 3 years. And they couldn't break down the walls. They couldn't get inside. But then there was a flood. The Tigris River flooded. Who said they were going to deliver Nineveh into the hands of the Babylonians and their enemies? God said, I'm going to do it. How did He do it? A flood. They couldn't break through the walls until the flood wiped out about 12 miles of their wall through flooding, over flooding. Then they had an opening, and they came through and destroyed Nineveh. But God is like a fortress that no matter what is brought against Him, cannot be broken down. It is our refuge. He is our refuge, our fortress, our shelter. We sing a song about that, don't we, sometimes? A fortress in the time of storm. Ancient cities were often protected by huge walls. When you get to Babylon, they're going to have a city very much like Nineveh, that their enemies couldn't break through. They couldn't break through the walls. It took some open gates for the Medo-Persians to walk right into the city and to get in an unprotected area. Maybe one day we'll talk about that a little more. It's a fascinating thing how it all took place, but that's not what we're here for right now. But they built these strong walls, and oftentimes there was more than one wall. And what happens there is if the army of another force could break through the outer wall, now you have an area in between, and now you've got another wall that they've got to try and breach, but that area in between the two walls usually then became a huge killing field. Impossible to defend themselves. Impossible to mount the force that they needed because they couldn't get enough troops through that little area that they broke through. So in times of danger, the people who lived outside, like in Nineveh had huge, what we call suburbs today, and they would flee into the city. The doors, huge doors, would be shut, and the enemy couldn't get in. But you know what? Many times that only afforded temporary protection. The walls could still be breached many times, except in these super cities, which would result in the loss of life or slavery, being taken by the enemy and sold into servitude. But when God protects His fortress, when God protects those who do His will, nothing can destroy His people. People have a lot of trouble with this idea because they think, well, wait a minute. Couldn't they still kill? Didn't they murder Jesus? Didn't they beat Paul mercilessly? Yeah. Haven't they through time waged war against individuals who were Christians, who were striving with all their might to do what God says, and hurt them in various ways and even killed them? Yeah? Well, how is it that God won't allow us to be destroyed? It's simple. Our physical bodies don't mean anything. It's just a shell. Jesus told us not to fear those who would kill body and soul, or body, to destroy our bodies, to murder us. Why? Because they can't take our soul. And if God so chooses, He can interfere through His providence to keep us alive. You ever wonder how many times that could possibly have happened to you or others around you? A good example of that is Daniel. Think about Daniel. Here he goes and he's been captured, taken to Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, an absolute ruler. If he says, you die, you die. That's it. And think about what happened. I don't want to eat that food, the king. Oh, would that be an insult to an absolute ruler? You don't want to benefit from the very best food, as far as I'm concerned, the very best food? But did you notice something about a man who was a eunuch over Daniel and his friends, who was tasked with taking care of them, providing for them, and making sure that they had everything they needed to be able to be healthy? The text says that God caused him to have favor and love toward Daniel. If I remember right, that's about verse 9 or 10 of chapter 1. God interfered. But my physical life, what is it compared to my soul? It's nothing. If the world decides to kill all of us who are Christians, I got a feeling God is going to do something about that, to make sure, as long as He wants this world to continue, that we will exist. He will protect us, and nothing they can do could cause us to lose our physical lives, and they surely can't take our spiritual life. Who is this protection provided for? The text says, He knoweth them that trust in him. God knows. He knows who will flee to him for protection. That's what the word trust here is all about. The Hebrew word is kashah. To flee. God knows who will flee to him. And he knows whether they're doing it because they really love God, are trying to obey him and trust him, or whether they're pretending. Or whether it's for them. You notice how some people, the only time they seem to pray is when some bad thing happens to them. And now all of a sudden they're going to pray to God and, I'm going to reform my life and I'm going to do. And as soon as the danger is over, they go right back to doing what they did before. Baker and Carpenter said this word, kashah, means to seek, to take refuge. Again, how many times have you and I taken refuge from the fact that knowing that God's going to take care of everything in the end, as long as we faithfully serve him? If we were to come under attack, where would we flee? Or where would we go? To a place of safety, to someone who could protect us. And there's only one who can truly provide safety for every one of us. The God of heaven. It's not the sheriff. You know, I hear some of these liberals go around saying, we got to get rid of all the guns and weapons in the world. Well, wait a minute. Jesus didn't say that. In fact, when he knew that a mob was going to come and get him in the garden, he asked the apostles, do you have any swords? They said, we have 2. That's enough. Jesus didn't get on their case because, you've got weapons. I hear liberals say, let the police take care of us. They'll take care of us. How does that work out? Look at some of the mobs that have been killing people recently. Look at the bombing that took place out in, I believe it was Nevada or somewhere like that, where they killed these Jewish people just recently. The police were able to take care of them, and they were there. They were there because they thought possibly there might be some trouble, but they couldn't protect them. It's not the army. It doesn't matter how many weapons we have. We in America, we think we're so safe because, look at all the nuclear weapons that we have. China thinks the same thing. So does Russia. But it doesn't matter how powerful our army is. They can't really protect us. A nation can't protect us. Only God can truly protect us. Protect our soul. Protect us to give us strength and courage to keep going. But again, who will he protect? Is he going to protect those who are foreign to him? Is China going to protect Americans? No. China will protect those who are Chinese citizens, just like America supposedly will protect American citizens. God's not going to protect those who refuse to obey him, who refuse to become his children, his people, his kingdom. He won't do it. Their souls are going to be lost. He's going to protect his own. He'll protect those who are loyal to him. Those who He knows are His loyal servants. Evil can't be camouflaged. William was saying, I was telling him about something, and he says, yeah, he said, enough weeds could grow around and look like that statue is in camouflage, in a ghillie suit. You might not believe this, but with the soldiers and the way they're trained nowadays, you can literally stand within inches of them from coming and stepping right on them. And they can be so well camouflaged that you don't even know they're there. No one can sneak into God's fortress, His kingdom, and destroy His people. Haley made this statement, I think it's a good one. He said, Jehovah is an impregnable stronghold to all who will flee to Him. His power is as great to protect us as it is to destroy. He is absolute ruler. Look at verse 8 of our text. But with an overrunning flood, He will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue His enemies. God's destruction, He says, is going to be like an overflowing flood. Look how Nineveh was finally destroyed by Babylon. Couldn't starve them out. Couldn't wait them out. Couldn't break the walls down. A flood did it. Overflowing, something that crosses over a boundary. That describes flooding, doesn't it? The Mississippi River every year usually overflows its banks. The banks are the boundary line, so to speak. But God can overflow any boundary line. He can cover the land. If you've ever seen the Mississippi in flood stage and drive on the highways that they've got elevated so that you don't drive down into the water down over in Arkansas, you'll see miles and miles and miles of water where during the non-flood stage you see rice fields and cotton fields and all of these other fields. God says there's going to be an overflowing of destruction. Again, by human standards at that time, Nineveh was impregnable, indestructible. But it wasn't indestructible to God. Nineveh was situated on the Tigris River, and the historians of that time have recorded for us that this flood wiped out a huge section. Some of them say as much as 12 miles of the wall that allowed the Babylonians to go in. Camp made this statement. He said, it was said that when Alexander the Great marched over the ruins of Nineveh in his conquest of the Persian Empire, that he did not even know it. Imagine that. A city that could have held 600,000 to 800,000 people, which the Bible says had 122,000 in Jonah. With the suburbs, we now know from LIDAR that it was a huge metropolis. And you march with an army over it and didn't even know it had been there? Look at verse 9. What do you imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. When we look at verses 9 through 5, we're going to see the announcement. This is the announcement. We've seen the power of God, that He cannot be defeated, that He cannot be stood against by any power, that what He determines is going to happen. But now we're going to see the actual announcement of the fall of Nineveh. And this is going to be good news for Judah, but bad news for Nineveh. He says, what do you imagine against the Lord? That word imagine means to plait or to weave, to fabricate something. If you take a straw and you bend it, it'll break, won't it? But if you take a bunch of straws, it will become harder to make it, but it may still break. But if you plait, if you weave all the straw together, you can be shocked at how strong it can be. Do you remember when we were little kids and they had this little thing that was woven out of straw, and you stuck your fingers into it until you couldn't get them in any further, and then you tried to pull them out, and you couldn't break it, you couldn't get it you couldn't do anything to damage it, to get your fingers apart. The idea is that somebody has been imagining things against God. They have been weaving and plaiting their schemes, fabricating ways to destroy God's people, to defeat God and His purpose. Somebody's plotting against God. Who was it? Oh, it was the Ninevites, the Assyrians. Who is it that somehow thinks that they're capable of successfully scheming against God and defeating God's purpose? You could ask the question, is it the Assyrians, or is it possibly Judah, or is it both? Remember, Judah has been gradually following the gods of the heathen, becoming more and more involved in idolatry. They think God is not going to bring retribution upon them at some point. Or maybe it's both, the Assyrians and the Jews. I believe it's talking about the Assyrians here. He'll take care of the Jews later in Judah for their rebellion. This deals with Assyria, possibly plotting against Judah to conquer them, to capture them. They'd tried it several other times. Remember, what is done against God, servants. What's done against God's servants is done against Him, isn't it? Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Jesus said to Saul of Tarsus, while Saul was on the road to Damascus to persecute, to kill, to imprison Christians. There's no indication Saul had ever met Jesus. None at all before this time. What will God do to His enemies who are plotting against His people if He still believes they need to continue to endure? He will make an utter end of them. An utter end. A termination. A full end. A destruction. Annihilation. Nineveh is going to be annihilated because they have been plotting against God through their plotting against His purpose and His people. And notice the statement, affliction shall not arise the second time. Good news for Judah. For generations, the Assyrians had been a thorn in Judah's side. It's as if God says, Assyria, you've gone too far this time. You're not going to trouble my people anymore. You're not going to trouble anyone ever again. I am going to thoroughly, completely destroy you. We'll come back with verse 10 next week.